This video came about as a result of my thinking about the various hobbies and fields that I've been involved in during my life, and thinking about how when you get quite good at something, you can look back on the progress you've made and see a big difference not really in what you do now versus what you did then, but rather what you consider to be important. In photography, the first thing that the beginner tends to think is important is the camera, obviously, and then they typically move on to thinking that it's more about the lens, and then maybe the tripod, and then maybe focal point or off-camera flash, lots of fun possibilities. And then one day, you realize that basically all photos suck unless they have good light. And when you have this revelation that you need good light to take a good photo, you basically think you've got nothing more to learn and you're pretty much ready to go pro. But that is not true. That is not what separates the amateur from the pro. Now in language learning, we don't have lenses and tripods and flashes and ND filters, so these stages of progression that a learner needs to go through in order to become a pro language learner are harder to see, but they're still there. The beginning photographer tends to think that if they have the right camera, then everything will go smoothly, while the beginning language learner tends to think that if they just have the right program or app, then they'll be set. You would not believe the number of people I get basically demanding that I do a review of Pimsleur.
Maybe you should do that then.
Like, okay, sure, one day I will get around to reviewing it, and I'm glad people trust my reviews enough to want me to review it. But what's it really matter what I think? It's just a program. Language learning programs are all kind of like synthetic compounds of the language, a bit like that stuff they eat in the Matrix. Okay, yeah, it keeps you alive, but it's not food. If you actually want to learn the language properly, you need food. But even once we step it up from there and talk about native speaker material, whether it's reading books or watching movies in the target language or talking to native speakers, I still see people bickering over methodology. You can't speak to native speakers if they're not from a certain place. You can only speak after exactly 53 hours of input every 18 days. And it reminds me all over again of photographers discussing cameras and lenses and tripods. About 5 years ago, my wife and I visited a landscape photographer's shop, and it was full of these huge, amazing quality prints, and I was impressed by the quantity of print-worthy photos that this photographer had. But when we came out, my wife said, well, I didn't really think his photos were that much better than yours. And I said, well, it's more about just how many he has, like he's got 100 and I've got 10, and just that he's got like small differences in quality and I haven't invested in printing them that big and all that kind of stuff. So I said that it was all about the number of photos that he had and small differences in quality. But I later realized that that was not correct. Although he was a better photographer than me for sure, he didn't get 100 printable quality photos by being 10 times the photographer I was. He got them by being out there with his gear, ready to take photos 10 times as often as I was. See, back then, what stopped me from becoming a real photographer, a pro photographer if you will, except that I'm not talking about getting paid, is that I wasn't there rain, hail or shine. I wasn't using every spare moment that I had to make my photos better like this guy was. The pro language learner doesn't necessarily use Asimov or Pimsleur or Michelle Thomas, or doesn't necessarily not use those things. The pro language learner needs only do one thing, and that is to show up every day. Maybe they're doing deliberate practice, maybe they're watching a movie in the language, maybe they're reading a book, maybe they have a tutor, maybe they don't. The fact that they're there, getting exposure to the target language is the most important aspect of anything that they do. Now I thought I'd keep this video nice and short for once, but I do want to do a follow-up video because this idea is loosely based on The War of Art by Steven Pressfield. It's an amazing book if you haven't read it. In it, he basically just talks about the mentality behind what it takes to do something for real, to do something properly. And he has some really great points, some really amazing, and he has an amazing way with words. So I want to go through some of the points in this book and how they apply to language learning in another video. If you're not subscribed already, make sure you do so that you'll not miss that one. And before the dog starts barking again, I will see you guys next time. Bye.